Hey guys, Tammy here. And in this video, we're going to talk about making verbal agreements in child custody. Now, I know a lot of people ask me this question like, oh, can we just agree verbally what we're going to do? And yes, you can. There are pros and cons that come up with doing this. And sometimes there's little sticky situations we didn't anticipate. So I'm going to dig into that a little bit. If you like this content, please hit like on this video and also subscribe to the channel so that you get notified as new videos are released. When we're talking about making verbal agreements, I can tell you that it's a problem when it comes to financial issues, okay? Because when there is an order in place on, let's say, child support or spousal support or something like that, and you start not following it, depending on which person you are, the payer or receiver, it can have different problems and effects and consequences, I guess is a good word for it. So I'll give you an example. If you pay $500 a month in child support and then you lose your job and then you just say to your ex, hey, is it okay if I pay you $300 a month in child support? And your ex, either doesn't respond or is like, well, okay. But it's kind of like, well, if that's what I have to accept, whatever. But they verbally agree on some, level, or even sometimes like in a parenting app or whatever. And they say, okay. And then you start paying that. The problem is you're still under a court order for the original 500, right? And that doesn't change just because your ex said, okay. So that's a problem. If your ex goes in and tries to enforce their $500 a month, the court's going to come after you for it because there's only proof that you've paid $300 a month, right? If that's what you were doing. And, we had a case like this several years ago where Thomas actually had somebody that this happened to, a gentleman that had reduced his support, did it based on a percentage and was very communicative with his ex-wife and said, well, I just am not making as much as I was before. And he calculated the percentage out himself and said, here's what I'm going to send you. And, she took it because she didn't really feel like she had the, ability to disagree with it and something was better than nothing. So she just kind of let it go. But then years later, she went back in and was like, oh, you owe me all of this back support. And the court was like, oh, the order's still in place. You do owe all this money in back support. And then, a lot of people don't know it starts accruing interest. So it becomes problematic. Anyway, so if you have financial issues, the warning is don't let those things go on without changing the court order. Okay. And you can do that just by having an agreement between the two of you. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Having an agreement that you guys reach drafted up by someone that knows what they're doing, right? So that you can submit it to the court and actually make it a court order. Because just between the two of you is not going to protect you enough on the financial side. Custody is a totally different ball game because in custody, the courts want you to cooperate. They want you to co-parent to the extent that you can. You have to remember that overly co-parenting, I don't know if that's even a thing, but I think there's a balance to it like everything else. You can almost be so informative and so cooperative and all that kind of thing that you actually cause more conflict. Okay. It's like too much togetherness, right? We are not together in a relationship for a reason. We got a divorce or we separated or whatever for a reason. And I think when people try to overshare between the households, it actually creates more conflict. So people you'll have a picture of your child doing something fun or enjoyable or whatever. And you think, oh, if I was the other parent, I would love to see a picture of this. So you send it off. Only for that other parent, what happens is they scrutinize the picture. Well, where were they? Well, did they go on a vacation to such and such place? Well, that's really expensive. How are they spending that if they owe me back support? And, all these things that their mind starts conjuring up. So it's usually better if you just don't overshare in that way because it usually leads to more conflict, which ultimately is worse for your kids. But where you can, the court does want you to cooperate and reach agreement on things. And, when you can do that, it's really good for the child. And so what I say is like, let's say that you have a 50-50 parenting plan, and let's say it's week on, week off. Okay. Like in my own case, my late husband's children, they were week on, week off. And they were really young when we started week on, week off. They were like 2 and 3, somewhere around there. And then by the time they were like 8 or 9, they were like seasoned pros when it came to custody and, transitioning back and forth between the households and all that. They'd been doing it for as long as they could remember. So they got to the point where they're kind of like, we don't really like this. We feel like we just are constantly like, we get there, we get settled, it's time to go back to the other parents, and we just feel really tossed about. And so we had a discussion with mom. Well, actually, I think mom suggested to us and said, hey, I don't know if the boys are verbalizing this to you, but they are to me. And I'm thinking maybe we should try a 2-week on, 2-week off. What do you think? And at first, Thomas was really hesitant to agree to that. He was like, I don't really like the thought of going 2 weeks without seeing, my 8 and 9-year-old kids. We kind of thought about it from their perspective, and we said, well, they've got activities and different things throughout the year. And really, we don't go the whole parenting time of moms without seeing them in some fashion. So, we can probably make it work. And so we did. They did that without ever going into court or ever actually changing their agreement on paper. Now, if you're going to agree to a different percentage of time, and you guys know I don't like to talk in percentages. Court never likes to hear that. But let's say that you have currently a 70-30 and you guys are going to transition to a 50-50. Okay, that's still fine. You can still do that on your own if you want to without agreeing to it on paper. And if you go into court, like if you're the parent that did have 30 and now you're going to have 50, all you have to do is, say to the court, well, I've been having 50-50 for the last 6 months or 12 months or whatever. And then, they'll probably change your order if that's what you've been doing, because they tend to kind of go with whatever's happening, not necessarily what's on the paper. So by the same token, if you're ordered every other weekend and you're not showing up, then that's a problem. You're at risk of getting your time decreased because, again, you're not doing what's actually written on the paper. But the problem usually becomes where two people make a verbal agreement and then somebody then decides, oh, now you've made me mad or upset me about something, and now I don't want to keep this verbal agreement. So now we're going to go back to the old agreement. The problem with that becomes you don't have anything enforceable. Okay. So when you guys have a dispute, let's say that it gets bad enough that you called the police and said, hey, this is my parenting time. They're not releasing the children. And, I'm asking you to get them to release the children. Well, for the officer, usually one of the very first things they will do is say, can I see a copy of your court orders? I know I had this personally happen to me. My ex-husband came to the house one night and he was like 4 hours late. And, his pickup time was already like 6 p.m. and he's showing up at 10 p.m. and he's like, give me the kid. And I'm like, no, it's 10 p.m. You were supposed to be here like 4 hours ago. So the officer asked to see my orders. And so I explained to him what was going on. And I said, I've offered him a different night this week. I've offered some alternatives, but, he's really upset that I'm not doing what he wants me to do and handing the child over. But I live 1 minute from the school, literally, and dad lives like 20 minutes from the school. So it's 10 at night. We're going to put the kid in a car, let him drive 20 minutes to dad's house, only to sleep less time so he could get up earlier to drive 20 minutes back to go to school in the morning. It just didn't make sense to me from the child's perspective. And so I had offered dad a different night or an alternative. Dad didn't like that, so he called the police. So when the police came and saw that my order was that he was supposed to be there at 6 o'clock and it's now 10, they told him he needed to go home. So therein lies the problem. So if you make a verbal agreement that, okay, let's say every Tuesday night is mom's night, and now you're going to agree that now every Tuesday night is dad's night. Well, okay, if we agree to that and then it's Tuesday night and dad has the kids and then mom says, oh no, I've decided this is my night and I want you to bring them home. And she calls the police, then the police are going to be like, hey dad, you need to return the kids. The court order says Tuesday night is mom's night. And then dad's going to say, well, but we made this verbal agreement. And the officer's going to be like, sorry, all you can really do is go to court on this issue. And that's pretty much always an officer's default. Well, sorry, if they can't do anything about it, they're going to tell you, you'll have to go see the judge about this. I personally think a lot of times when they say that, there's not really a whole lot the judge can do either, but that's kind of their default way of kind of covering their own butt, if you will. You have to be careful with the verbal agreements, and they're good and they can be very cooperative and they can actually garner a lot of goodwill between you. But then if you have somebody on the other side who repeatedly goes back on those agreements and doesn't stick with them or whatever, then it can be problematic. Okay. So I'm not saying don't try it, but I'm saying if this becomes a repeated issue, then you kind of know and figure out that doing a verbal agreement and with this particular person really won't work. A lot of people, you can solve a lot of your own problems that way and avoid having to go to court over and over. But there are certain people that will, change their mind to suit them when it's convenient for them. So, things to be aware of. If you guys would like to learn more about my coaching services, you can go to Divorce University Online /VIP-coaching. There's a link on that page where you can book a time to speak to a member of my staff and learn more about my services and how I might be able to support you in your custody journey. See you guys next time.